Is the Weebill 3E the best entry-level camera gimbal? After reviewing several Gimbal products and loving them, the new Weebill 3E actually took me by surprise, and not entirely for the right reasons. Hey everyone, Nick here. Today we're looking at the latest from Gimbal, the Cinepeer Weebill 3E. This compact gimbal claims to be a game changer for entry-level filmmakers, but does it live up to the hype? In this video, I'm going to break down everything you need to know before you decide to add this gimbal to your camera bag. We'll start with my first impressions and take on the build quality, then move on to the setup and key features. I'll share my experience testing it with my camera and highlight the pros and cons. And then finally, I'll give you my honest verdict on whether or not the Weebill 3E is worth your investment. So let's get started. All right, so getting into my first impressions and the build quality. Overall, I was really quite impressed when I first unboxed the gimbal itself. It's priced at a fairly modest US $250, which is about standard for these types of entry-level gimbal. Personally, overall, I really like the aesthetic of this gimbal. I think it looks quite nice with the gray and black finish. The build quality is definitely solid, which is no exception when it comes to Gimbal products in my experience. Everything feels really high quality and well built, so I have no issues there whatsoever. I'm also a big fan of the lightweight of this gimbal. It comes in at about 1 kilo, and also really do love the compact size. It's actually almost perfect for me personally. It's not too big and bulky, which means I'm able to easily take it out and about on shoots when I'm outdoors, or just use it at home and store it away easily. But it's also not so small that when I'm using it, it feels uncomfortable or not ergonomic. I really appreciate that the detachable tripod at the bottom actually extends a decent amount, which for me means I'm able to get a really solid grip on the gimbal, which means I've experienced less fatigue while using it. Now let's move on to the setup experience and key features when it comes to this gimbal. So after I unboxed the 3E, I started to set it up, and this, to be honest, is actually where I first started to run into some issues. I don't think it's just me, but I've found it a bit more difficult to balance than other gimbals that I've experienced before. Also took it out on a shoot with a friend, and he also experienced some difficulty balancing the gimbal. I mainly used a Sony ZV-E1 with a 24mm G Master lens, which is well within the payload limit. I actually found that I really had to maximize the horizontal axis in order to be able to get a stable balance. I also found the base plate kind of annoying, like it's actually really quite large, and if I tighten it too far forward, it interferes with the focus ring on my lens. So I had to make sure that it was mounted far enough back. Plus there's no finger tightening mechanism, which means you'll always need a tool to be able to put it on or take it off, either an Allen key or some sort of tightening screw or a coin. And to me, this just kind of seems like a bit of a basic oversight. Again, I've used gimbals that just use finger tightening mechanisms that do a really great job, which means you don't need to carry around any extra tools, and you can really quickly and easily just put the base plate on or take it off. And so overall, to me, one of the biggest frustrations a lot of people have with gimbals is the whole setup and balancing process. And it just felt like with the Weebill 3E, it was unnecessarily frustrating. Even just the addition of a finger tightening mechanism on the base plate would go a long way in making the whole setup process easier. Now, once I actually had the camera on there and balanced, I started to play around with the modes and the OLED screen. And it is a clear and sharp OLED screen, but again, it just doesn't feel very intuitive. It's quite basic. And in my experience, there's definitely better touchscreen options out there on similarly priced gimbals. I also found the associated phone app to be quite buggy on my iPhone. I had consistent connection issues. The gimbal itself wouldn't always connect to the app, and then sometimes it would. And then kind of the last straw for me with the app was the fact that it just wouldn't let me update the firmware. I don't really know why, but I ended up having to use the desktop app, which was really not user-friendly at all, to be able to actually update the firmware. And even that failed a couple of times before I was able to make it work. Now, in terms of the overall key features, this is where it started to win some points back for me. The Bluetooth recording control is really nice. You can connect it via Bluetooth to your camera as long as it's compatible, and then use the record button on the gimbal to start and stop recording. And if you don't have Bluetooth on your camera, you can also wire it in using USB, which is a nice touch. It's got a 3 kilo payload, which is really solid. The trigger and the scroll wheel are also customizable, so you can change what settings and modes these change. It does also have a portrait mode, which I think is important in this day and age, so that's really nice to see. And it does have solid battery performance. In my experience, it easily lasted a full day of shooting, but on the website it's quoted as having 16 hours of battery life. Plus, if you've got a quick charger, you can charge it in about 2 hours. Next, I did some performance testing and actual shooting shooting with the gimbal. And this is probably where it performed the strongest. Testing it with my Sony, I had really smooth footage. I really had no complaints. Like overall, it was just very solid, very smooth footage. The type of stabilization that you would expect from this type of a gimbal. And I'd say overall, it's easily on par, if not slightly surpassing other gimbals at the same price point. Again, overall, the ease of use was really nice. The fact that it's lightweight meant that I didn't experience a lot of fatigue, even when using it for longer shooting sessions. Plus again, that longer tripod handle made it more ergonomic and easier to grip, resulting in less fatigue. And I'm personally also a big fan of the different modes in the Weebill 3E. My most used one was probably the pan follow, which is a fairly standard type of mode on gimbals. It's also got a lock mode, which I'm a big fan of, which locks the direction of the gimbal, meaning there's one less axis to worry about. It's got a follow mode, a point of view mode, vortex, and portrait modes as well. Now let's move on to the pros and cons. And to start off with the pros, like I mentioned, you do get really solid gimbal performance once the camera is on it. It's very smooth footage, and I don't think you'll be disappointed at all. It's got some really great shooting modes that will assist you in getting some quite creative shots. It's got great battery life, so you won't have to worry about running out during a shoot, and it's got overall great build quality. Now, in terms of the cons, like you've heard, there are quite a few in my book. Like I said, I think the biggest issue that a lot of people have with gimbals is the actual setup process and balancing the gimbal. That barrier often means that gimbals just get left at home or on the shelf because people just can't be bothered to put the effort into setting them up. And so for me, the fact that it's relatively difficult to balance and that base plate is a pain to attach and detach is a really big con. That could mean if you do end up buying the 3E, it might just end up sitting on your shelf. I think the other main con is just the fact that the menu system and display isn't that intuitive, and I've definitely seen better touch displays on other gimbals. So what's my final verdict for the Cinepeer Weebill 3E? To be honest, I think this is the first Gion product that I haven't really liked. In my opinion, I would actually probably prefer a gimbal that had worse performance and ergonomics if it meant a more intuitive and quick setup. Now that's obviously just my take. I shoot a lot of varied content, so I often switch between using a gimbal, a tripod, and handheld. And so for me, I personally want to be able to quickly swap my camera in amongst these three different sort of modes. And this might be less of an issue for you if you primarily use your camera only on a gimbal. So who would this gimbal best be suited for? Yes, I think it's best for entry-level videographers who do want to save some money on a cheaper gimbal. And I think it'll suit you best if you primarily use a gimbal to film. Personally, in my opinion, I think for the same amount of money, there are better gimbal options out there. But let me know what you think. I know a lot of other people online have really liked the 3E, so maybe it's just not for me. It might be for you. And don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to see more reviews like this one. And if you're interested in my reviews of some other Gion products, then check out my reviews playlist right here.